Shabbat Shalom. Welcome. We're so happy that you're joining Westchester Reform Temple's live stream Shabbat services. I'm Rabbi Jonathan Blake. Rabbi Daniel Reeser and Cantor Danielle Rodnitsky join us this evening, and we are so happy that you're with us. Take a couple moments, greet the people who might be sharing your Shabbat under your roof, and wave to one another. We also invite anyone who'd like to join the Zoom. You can do so. The link was published in the weekly electronic newsletter. You can simply sign on if you'd like to interact with us a little bit. We would love to be able to see you and greet you and stick around after services for a little online mix and mingle. We are celebrating Shabbat tonight in the presence of 3 young men and their families, each of whom will be called forward to the Torah tomorrow morning at Westchester Reform Temple in celebration of B'nai Mitzvah. Rabbi Reeser is bringing them on screen now. We celebrate with Caleb Grassheim, Joshua Wagner, and Spencer Goldfarb and their loved ones. And it's so nice to see the Grassheim, Wagner, and Goldfarb families with their Shabbat candles. And I have my Shabbat candles over here as well, and would invite all of you out in congregation land to join us as we welcome Shabbat by kindling these lights. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner Shel Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom. Once again, Mazel Tov to you, to Spencer, to Caleb, and to Joshua on your milestone. We feel the warmth and the glow of your homes. We know that this will be a bright and memorable Shabbat, and we pray that the joy that you associate with it will provide a lifetime of happy memories. Mazel Tov once again. Thank you for being with us, and Shabbat Shalom. We're going to continue by singing words that come from the Bible's book of Psalms. Lechu neranana ladonai, words that mean, come, let's sing out with rejoicing unto the Holy One of Blessing. Lechu neranana.
continue with the words of Lecha Dodi, our special piyut, a liturgical poem for welcoming the Shabbat bride. Yalalalai Lecha Dodi, yalalalai likrat kala, yalalalai pnei Shabbat, pnei Shabbat nekavela, yalalalai Lecha Dodi, yalalalai likrat kala, yalalalai pnei Shabbat, pnei Shabbat nekavela, shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, hishmi'anu el hamuchad, Adonai echad u'shmo echad, l'shem u'tiferet le'litilah, yai, yalalalai Lecha Dodi, yalalalai likrat kala, yalalalai pnei Shabbat, pnei Shabbat nekavela, likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, ki v'kor haberacha, merosh mikedem nesucha, סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה, יאללה Lecha Dodi, יאללה לקראת כלה, יאללה פני שבת, פני שבת nekavela, התעוררי, כי באורך קומי אורי, אורי, שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה, יאללה Lecha Dodi, יאללה לקראת כלה, יאללה פני Shabbat, פני Shabbat nekavela, בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה, יאללה Lecha Dodi, יאללה לקראת כלה, יאללה פני Shabbat, פני Shabbat nekavela. We continue with the Baruch Hu, our call to worship. Yai, lai, lai, yai, lai, 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 yai, lai, lai, yai, lai, 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 yai, lai, lai, yai, lai, lai, lai,
A word, specifically a proper noun, is introduced for the very first time in the Torah in this week's parasha, this week's Torah portion, by Yishlach. It's a word that will be carried throughout our Torah, indeed throughout all of Jewish tradition up to the present day. And in fact, will become the very last word in the 5 books of Moses, in the Torah itself. That word, of course, is Yisrael, Israel. It's the name given to Yaakov, or Jacob, after his long night of wrestling with a mysterious messenger, divine being, who grasps him in an embrace, but not a friendly embrace, the embrace of an adversary. All night long, the two of them wrestle, and it is not until dawn that the adversary sees that he is overcome and is about to let go, but Jacob refuses to yield until he can extract from his adversary a blessing. And at that moment, God bestows upon Yaakov the name Yisrael, which means one who strives with God, saying, "You have striven with beings divine and human, and you have prevailed." This is what it is to be Yisrael, to be Israel, to be a Jew. It is to strive and not to submit to whatever challenge, whatever difficult circumstances in which we might find ourselves, until we have managed to withdraw from those circumstances a blessing. Last night at our mid-year congregational check-in, I shared with the many in attendance that we are still in the middle of a long night of wrestling with an adversary that cannot be seen, but that has taken countless lives and continues to exact a most heavy penalty upon all human beings. How will we learn to extract a blessing? How will we learn to live up to our name Yisrael through this difficult and dark experience? That challenge is each of ours to own, that we might live up to our name. So now let us proclaim together rightly the watchword of our faith, the words that call upon us as Yisrael together. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem, Kevod Malchuto, Leolam Vaed. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
At special times during the year, particularly right before different holidays, we use special traditional melodies to signal the fact that our holiday is coming soon. And believe it or not, it's already Hanukkah next week, which I can't believe. I don't know about you guys. My voice is kind of gone, so we'll see what happens. But we'll be in it together. I think you guys will recognize this melody. We'll start with Yai Lai so that we can sing together. Yai Lai 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 Lai, Yai Lai Lai La La Lai Lai Lai, Yai Lai 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 Lai, Yai Lai Lai La La Lai Lai Lai, Yai נאמר כיפד אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך. Shelter us beneath your wings, O Adonai. Guard us from all harmful things, O Adonai. Keep us safe throughout the night, till we wake with morning's light. Teach us wrong from right. Amen. 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 ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak ve'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel ve'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor ve'Hanora El Elyon גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. Please take a few moments to be with your own thoughts and prayers. You can either be seated or remain standing, whatever is your most prayerful position.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, יעשה שלום עלינו, עושה שלום במרומיו. ועל כל as one, and we say Amen.
Shabbat Shalom. So I don't know if your Thanksgiving was anything like my Thanksgiving. I've spoken to a lot of congregants in the past week or so, and I've heard that a lot of people had a similar kind of experience to the one that I had, which is that Thursday came and Thursday went. And while we got to enjoy sort of the small pleasures of Thanksgiving, a lot of the big things that make the holiday feel especially celebratory on normal years were missing. And for me, it sort of felt like, okay, we had a very special dinner together at home, but in a lot of ways, it felt like a lot of other nights that we have dinner together at home. Kind of just another day in the seemingly endless series of days where one looks kind of like the one before it. Sort of this interminable gray that we've all been in since the pandemic arrived. It was particularly hard for me, and I think for other congregants as well, considering that Thanksgiving is supposed to be a time where we experience something heightened, something different, something that's beyond the day to day and the ordinary, something that's a little bit larger than life. Usually we go outside and kick around a pile of leaves or throw the football with a big group of family and friends, and all those things that make the holiday feel extra special, at least for my holiday, were missing. And I really missed them a lot. It feels like a really good expression of what we've all been dealing with kind of this whole year, which is that one of the hardest parts of this pandemic, beyond the illness that so many have experienced and unfortunately the loss that so many have experienced as well, one of the hardest parts for those of us who've been lucky enough to stay healthy and to have jobs that allow us to continue to pay the bills has been the loss of the little things that punctuate life and give us moments to look forward to, peaks, and not just the normal day-to-day of mowing the grass. In fact, that's been so much a part of the experience of this year that one organization in our world has highlighted it as kind of like the main thing or one of the main things that has marked 2020. Of all of the year-end culminating lists that come out, best TV shows of the year, best music of the year, best books of the year, one of my favorite lists that comes out is all the different dictionary publishers come out with their most important word of the year. And this year, the Oxford English dictionaries couldn't come up with just one word. They actually had to come up with a whole set of words. And one of the words in their list really well captures this thing I've been describing about how Thanksgiving was supposed to be special, but in a lot of ways it kind of looked like the normal blurry gray that we see all the other days of the year. Let me share with you now what the word was that they came up with to describe it. They said that one of their words of the year this year is Blursday. And yes, you're right, Blursday is a pun, sounds a little bit like Thursday. Blursday is one of Oxford Language's words of an unprecedented year, and how they define Blursday is a day of the week that's indistinguishable from any other. And it felt to me this year like Thanksgiving was not a special Thursday, but was kind of more of a Blur's Day, a day that felt just like the one before. Now, of course, this word pause makes me pause and want to ask, well, why did they come up with Blur's Day as opposed to maybe Blends Day, which I think would be a pun on Wednesday, where Wednesday blends into all the other days of the year, Blends Day. At any rate, Oxford English dictionaries chose Blur's Day to describe 2020. And that certainly feels, at least in part, how my Thanksgiving felt, and maybe yours as well. I find that I'm thinking about this not just because Thanksgiving has come and gone, but also because Hanukkah is fast approaching. Usually in the United States, the winter holidays are another time of special magical feeling. Sometimes we're lucky enough to get snow. And me, a Floridian by birth, finds the snow quite charming, and all the things that start to happen around the Hanukkah season where we get together with family and friends and where the house smells like fried latkes, I anticipate will also possibly be missing this year. And it reminds me a little bit of something in the Hanukkah story, which might help us to find our way through during this year of Blur's Days and Blends Days. Let's take a quick look at what I've titled this talk. It's going to be called, if we can go back one slide, The Miracle of Hanukkah, or Why humans need imagination. So, of course, the Hanukkah story tells a story that's a little bit larger than life. Like we were saying, is some of the magic of Thanksgiving, that things are larger than life. The Hanukkah story tells us about this miraculous oil that was only supposed to last one night, but instead somehow burned for 8 nights. That's a really good illustration of something that's beyond the ordinary. This little thing of oil, if it was ordinary, would have only lasted one night, but somehow miraculously, it lasted for 8 nights. That's something that's beyond the ordinary. Well, let's look for a second at where that story comes from and talk a little bit about what that story means and how that story might inform us as we continue to go through this year full of Blends Days and Blurs Days, and especially as we approach the upcoming special Hanukkah and winter holiday season, how it might inform us to find a little bit of heightened joy even amidst the sort of interminable gray that we feel on a day-to-day basis. So it turns out that if you tell the Hanukkah story, there's a lot of different ways to tell it. The original version of the Hanukkah story is told in a book that's called the Book of Maccabees. And the Book of Maccabees actually isn't a part of the Hebrew Bible, but it was written at the same time or nearly contemporaneous to the battle that the Maccabees fought against the Syrian Greeks. Let's see what it is that this earliest version of the Hanukkah story has to say about the holiday and see what it might teach us. So the earliest version of the story, again from the Book of Maccabees, has this to say. There's a letter that the Jews who are rebelling against the Syrian Greeks in Jerusalem are writing to their cousins who live just, down the road in Egypt. And here's the text of the letter. Again, this comes from the Book of Maccabees. From the Jews of Jerusalem and Judea to those in Egypt, we send warm greetings. May God be with you. In the year 169, those Jews in Jerusalem write to their cousins in Egypt. In the year 169, when Demetrius II was king of Syria, we wrote to tell you about the persecution and the hard times that came upon us in the years after Jason revolted against authority in the Holy Land. Jason and his men set fire to the temple gates and slaughtered innocent people. Okay, this is describing the things that led up to the Maccabean revolt against the Syrian Greeks. Then we prayed to the Eternal, and God answered our prayers. They prayed to God, and also they rose up in a military battle and defeated the Syrian Greeks who were oppressing them. So, in order to give thanks, we sacrificed animals, gave offerings of grain, lit lamps in the temple. Okay, there's an important detail to note. They won this military victory, and so they lit lamps in the temple, and they set out the sacred loaves. This, the Jews in the land of Israel are writing to their cousins in Egypt, this is why we urge you to celebrate in the month of Kislev, which is the month when Hanukkah falls, a festival similar to the festival of shelters. Okay, any text that's older than 100 years old always bears a little bit of unpacking. So let's unpack a little bit about what's going on in this text. These Jews in Jerusalem are writing to their cousins in Egypt, describing for them what happened during the Hanukkah story. And they say there was this great war, which we eventually rose up and beat our Syrian Greek oppressors. And afterwards, we came back to our temple, and what did we do? We did all the normal things that ancient Jews would have done in their temple. They sacrificed animals, they offered grain offerings, and importantly, they lit lamps in the temple, just like we do on a Friday night here for our Shabbat services. They lit lamps in the temple, and it just so happened that this opportunity to go back into the sanctuary and rededicate it happened in the month of Kislev. And so they say, oh, you in Egypt, you should also celebrate a holiday in the month of Kislev. And what holiday does it kind of look like? It looks like the Festival of Shelters. That's the holiday of Sukkot, in case we needed any clarification. It seems from this earliest version of the telling of the Hanukkah story that what was this holiday of lighting lamps? Well, it was simply a delayed celebration of Sukkot. They couldn't celebrate Sukkot while they were fighting this war. And then when the war was over, they went back into the temple and they did all the things they normally did, kind of like a festival of shelters. But instead of being, back in the fall when we usually do Sukkot, this year we had to do it in Kislev. And one of the things we did is we lit some lamps. Okay, that's the earliest version of the Hanukkah story. Notice that very absent from this story is any mention of a little jar of oil that somehow miraculously lasted 8 days. This is a very everyday kind of story. It's about a people who won a military victory and then went back and dedicated their temple, and nothing special happened, just that they were really excited to be back there. Okay, that's the first version of the story missing the miracle of the oil. Let's take a look at the next version of the telling of the Hanukkah story. Several hundred years later, the rabbis of the Talmud would tell the following story about Hanukkah. Several hundred years later, the rabbis of the Talmud ask, what is Hanukkah? And why are lights kindled on Hanukkah? Well, the Gemara goes on to answer, the Gemara is an ancient Jewish text, that on the 25th of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah are 8. When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. And when the Hasmonean monarchy, the Maccabees, overcame them and emerged victorious over them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest, undisturbed by the Greeks. And there was sufficient oil there to light the candelabrum for only one day. Okay, this sounds a little more familiar. A miracle occurred, and they lit the candelabrum from it 8 days. The next year, the sages instituted those days and made them holidays. Okay, let's just pause and see where we are. The original version of the story of Hanukkah makes no mention of a miraculous jar of oil. It basically says, we didn't get to celebrate Sukkot in the fall because we were busy fighting a war, but when the war ended, we came back into the sanctuary, we celebrated Sukkot, and one of the things you do on Sukkot is you light candles because, hey, that's what Jews do. That's the original version. The later version that the rabbis wrote several hundred years after the Maccabean revolt adds something new, adds something special, something elevated, something that we're all familiar with, that there was this little jar of oil that somehow miraculously lasted not just one night, but 8 nights. That's something extraordinary, something out of the normal, something beyond the day-to-day, the blurs day or the blends day of life, something that's extraordinary, something special. And it might lead us to wonder, well, why? Why did these rabbis several hundred years later go back to that sort of mundane story and add something miraculous? What's motivating them to sort of rewrite history, as it were? I've got a couple of possible, these aren't my explanations, but a couple of possible explanations that scholars bring as to why the rabbis made something larger than life out of the Hanukkah story in their time, even though the original version of the story that they inherited said no such thing. Let's take a look at what some of those possible reasons are. So, why this story? Why this larger than life thing that gets added to the mundane version of the Hanukkah story? Well, one possible reason is that the rabbis needed to add a theological underpinning for a holiday that otherwise just celebrated a military victory. They looked at their tradition that they had inherited and they saw that there was this holiday that had celebrated some sort of military victory of the Maccabees over the Syrian Greeks. They said, what kind of religious holiday is this? If it's just celebrating a military victory, we need to give it some sort of theological dimension. And so they add this story of a miracle, of some oil that was only supposed to last one night, but lasted 8 nights. It establishes a theological dimension to what otherwise is simply a political or a military one. Notice, by the way, that it's not just theological, it's also a metaphor that connects the two things. The Maccabees were a small, little rebellious group that rose up and defeated the much more powerful Syrian Greek army, a small but mighty force. Same thing with this oil. A small little jar of oil that should have run out of steam, should have run out of fuel after just one night, but somehow miraculously lasted 8 nights. They establish a metaphor, a linking of two things that are unlike each other, but in some way share something in common. That's one first possible reason why the rabbis established this larger than life thing when they initially inherited something mundane, to establish a theological dimension and also to make a metaphorical link between the small but mighty Maccabees and the small but mighty cruse of oil. That's reason number one. Possible reason number two, why this story came to be. Second, maybe they needed to downplay the idea that somehow Jews are a rebellious sort. The Maccabees rebelled against their Syrian Greek oppressors. The rabbis who wrote the Talmud had just lived through another Jewish uprising, this time not against the Syrian Greeks, but in their time, more recently, against Rome. And that rebellion was brutally crushed. The rabbis who wrote the story may have been trying to distance themselves from the idea that the Jewish nation is always going to rebel against its global superpowers who are in its backyard. Maybe it was a geopolitical move saying, no. Even though there was that rebellion by the Maccabees so long ago, and even though just a couple of generations ago we rebelled against Rome, that's not really who we are. Who we really are a people who believe in something larger than life, something miraculous. That's a second possible reason, sort of a more practical reason. Okay, a third possible reason why this story gets added from the first telling to the second telling is possibly the rabbis were contending with the fact that Christianity in their day was on the rise. And Christianity, after all, has as one of its central theological tenets something that is miraculous. A person who died came back to life. That's a miracle. And the rabbis felt like, oh, perhaps we need a story that's miraculous as well, something to help put us in contention with our Christian neighbors and have our religion look as attractive as theirs does. Maybe that's a third possible reason why the rabbis may have added this story about the oil that lasted 8 nights. Those are all good possible reasons. And they're sort of like historical looking reasons. They don't really tell us anything about our present day. Remember that we set all of this up by saying that we're living in a time where every day feels like Blend's Day or Blur's Day, and that we actually need times in our lives where we get to transcend the everyday. We need times in our lives where we tell unbelievable stories, like a little cruise of oil that lasts 8 nights. This is the fourth reason, and I think the, for us, most instructive possible reason for why the rabbis told this story. They told this story about the oil that lasted 8 nights to show and as a demonstration of the fact that humans need our imaginations. We can't survive if we only live in the day-to-day and in the empirical and what we can see. We need, in order to survive the brutality of this world, the ability to imagine things that are unimaginable, to live as if there are things that are larger than life. To help us make this point, I want to just bring briefly 2 thinkers to bear. The first is Ada Lovelace. If you haven't heard of Ada Lovelace, she's credited as being the first computer programmer. She lived in the 19th century, and I think she was the child of a baron. I can't remember the baron's name. At any rate, she's credited as being the first computer programmer, and in her letters, she writes the following. Ada Lovelace wrote, "What is imagination? First, imagination is the combining faculty. It brings together things, facts, ideas, conceptions in new, original, endless, and ever-varying combinations. Imagination seizes points in common between subjects having no very apparent connection, and hence seldom or never brought into juxtaposition. So with this first little paragraph, Ada Lovelace is reminding us of what the rabbis did by linking up this small but mighty army of the Maccabees with the small but mighty cruise of oil, combining 2 things that seem to have nothing in common, but somehow bringing them into juxtaposition. That's what imagination is, making connections between seemingly disconnected things. That's the first thing that Ada Lovelace says imagination is. But she goes on and says, secondly, imagination conceives and brings into mental presences that which is far away or invisible, or which, in short, does not exist within our physical cognizance. Hence, it is especially the religious faculty, the groundwork of faith. It is a godlike, noble faculty. It renders earth tolerable. At least it should do so. It teaches us to live in the tone of the eternal. Imagination is the discovering faculty preeminently. It is that which penetrates into the unseen worlds around us. It is that which feels and discovers what is, the real which we see not, which exists not for our senses. What is imagination? It renders earth tolerable. It allows us to live in the tone of the eternal. It allows us to see things that are real, but which our eyes see not. It allows us to get out of the Blur's Day and Blend's Day experience that we've been having for the past 9 months and believe, no matter how unbelievable it may seem, that there are other things out there besides waking up, brushing our teeth, going through our same day-to-day routine every single day, hopefully brushing our teeth again before we go to bed, and waking up the next day and doing it all over again. We need imagination to break us out of the ordinary and help us believe that there are things out there that are extraordinary. Imagination inspires us, allows us to live, gives us a taste of the eternal. That's what we need during these day-to-day gray times that we're living in. That's what the Hanukkah story provides us. Not just a story of an army that defeated a superpower around it, but rather something fantastical, something imagined, like a jar of oil that was only supposed to last one night, but instead lasted 8. Believing in such things that are beyond belief allows us to believe that when our lives are humdrum and day-to-day, that our lives could be different too. So Ada Lovelace puts all of this in a philosophical tone, but sometimes philosophy speaks in a certain tenor, and we need a different kind of tenor to help us, or timbre maybe is the right word, to help us really grasp the idea. So we're going to bring just one other thinker to bear on all of this. This is from a playwright whom I love. Her name is Sarah Ruhl, R-U-H-L, Sarah Ruhl, and she has an amazing little book. It's called 100 Essays I Don't Have Time to Write. And in this little book, 100 Essays I Don't Have Time to Write by Sarah Ruhl, she says in a different tone of voice what it is that Ada Lovelace put in her sort of philosophical writing. Let's read just this last selection from Sarah Ruhl. Sarah Ruhl writes in 100 Essays I Don't Have Time to Write, published in 2014. She's a playwright, recall. So she's writing about umbrellas on stage. Picture, if you can, like you go to see Singing in the Rain or something like that at your local community theater, and they don't have the technical wizardry to actually make it rain on stage. So you go to see the show, and the actor who's playing the Gene Kelly part opens an umbrella on stage. Let's see what Sarah Ruhl has to say about that moment, the magic that takes place in that moment. She writes, "Why are umbrellas so pleasing to watch on stage? The illusion of being outside and being under the eternal sky is created by a real object. A metaphor of limitlessness is created by the very real limit of an actual umbrella indoors. Cosmology is brought low by the temporary shelter of the individual against water. The sight of an umbrella makes us want to feel both wet and dry, the presence of rain and the dryness of shelter. The umbrella is real on stage, and the rain is a fiction. Even if there are drops of water produced by the stage manager, we know that it won't really rain on us. And therein lies the total pleasure of theater, a real thing that creates a world of illusory things." Okay, this is all still pretty strongly in the philosophical tenor or timbre, just like Ada Lovelace. But now let's let Sarah Ruhl illustrate it for us in the way that only playwrights can do. Sarah Ruhl takes it one step further and says the following. "I have an umbrella with a picture of the sky inside." Picture, you open the umbrella and underneath the canopy, a picture of blue skies and white clouds. "I have an umbrella with a picture of the sky inside. My daughter, Anna, said when she was 3 and underneath it, 'We have 2 skies, the umbrella sky and the real sky.' When I went out with her in the rain recently without an umbrella, she said, 'It's all right, Mama. I will be your umbrella.' And she put her arms over my head." This is Sarah Ruhl showing us how things that are unbelievable can still somehow give us access to things that are true, no matter how unreal they seem. Her daughter's imagination and seeing that when an umbrella opens on stage, we somehow have access to big ideas. Her daughter's imagination allowed her to believe that the umbrella that was painted like a sky was a real sky, and that all it takes is to create some kind of little shelter, and no matter what's happening outside around you, that you'll stay dry. That we can open a little umbrella, and no matter what's happening in the sky above us, that we ourselves can be under blue skies with white clouds. That even if we don't have an umbrella, all we need to do is utilize our imagination, the same way we do when we go to the theater and suspend our disbelief when that actor opens their umbrella on stage. All we need to do is utilize our imagination, and we put our arms over our head like this little 3-year-old girl does, and we can believe that under our own little shelter, we'll always stay dry. I think this is such an important message for those of us who are living through this really, really challenging time, where every day seems the same as the last, and where a lot of the big moments that help to punctuate life have been diminished, which is that no matter how much our day looks the same as the one that came before, and how much we anticipate the one that's coming won't look any different than the one that is, that we can still find ways to escape from the humdrum in the day-to-day. We can use our imagination, And in using our imagination, be reminded of things that are true, even though they seem larger than life. And so next week, when we go to light our Hanukkah menorah and we remember that story that the rabbis added to Hanukkah about a little jar of oil that wasn't supposed to last very long at all, but instead lasted 8 whole nights, we'll be remembering not just how the Maccabees were small but mighty and how the Jewish people has been small but mighty throughout our whole history. We'll be remembering also that we're a people who believes that imagination is a really important human tool, one that can help to rescue us from the worst of situations and maybe even help us to make the best of this world when it challenges us as it has been doing for these past 9 months. Ken Yehi, may this be so. And let me wish your family now an early happy Hanukkah. Shabbat Shalom. We'll take a moment now to think of people in our community who are in need of a prayer for healing. And if there's someone that you're thinking of who needs a prayer for healing, I invite you to say their name aloud wherever you may be. If you're with us here in the Zoom room, you can chat their name to us in the chat box. Alternatively, you might draw to mind an image of their face in your mind's eye. And as you're thinking of those that you love who need a prayer for healing, our WRT community prays for the following: for Andrea Rayner, for Mordechai Ben Yaakov, for Deborah Kapnick, Nicole Shusey, Susan Colby, Neil Glaskell, Chaim Ben Sipora, Masha Batsora, Joyce Schertzer, Leah Greenspan, Aviva Tzila Bat Esther Bela, Dan Sokoloff, Jeffrey Millman, Cheryl Brickman, Chava Batsara, Eliyahu Chaim Ben Fradel, Sheila Freed, Tanya Romanoff, Yitzchak Yona Ben May, Malka Tzipora Bas Rachel, Tamar Bat Malka, Heschel Meir Ben David Achana, David Ze'ev Ben Fruma Etzel, Shai Aviad Ben Balfora, Rabbi Eitan Hammerman, Alter Shmuel Ben Chava Leah. We join together now in our prayer for healing. Misha Berach. Misha Berach Avoteinu Bekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misha Berach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Le'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. We begin to conclude our worship with the words Aleinu L'Shabeach. Please join with us. Aleinu L'Shabeach La'adon HaKol, La'tet Gedula Le'otzer Breshit, Shelo Asanu Kegoye Ha'aratzot, Velo Samanu Kemishbachot Ha'adama, Shelo Sam Chelkenu Kahem, Vegoralenu Kechol Hamonam. Ba'anachnu korim umishtachavim umodim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu v'nemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz. Bayom hahu, Yeh Adonai echad, Ushemo Ushemo, Ushemo Echad. The Jewish people is a people who knows the power of lighting candles. We began our service this evening with 3 families kindling lights for Shabbat, and in recognition of the joy they feel that their children are becoming B'nai Mitzvah. We will kindle next week the lights of Hanukkah. And of course, there are always those in our community who are kindling lights of remembrance, who light a yahrzeit candle in memory of the people whom they have loved and lost. A candle is the unlikeliest of symbol. Its flame is the smallest thing we can imagine, and yet in a room that's entirely dark, even the smallest little flicker of flame can help to light up the room. And so as we prepare now to say the Mourner's Kaddish, we will draw into our minds the flames of the lives that have come before us and that have gone before us. And we mention especially by name those most recently taken from us. We remember Phyllis Smith, husband of Harold Smith and mother of Lizette Smith. Warren Young, husband of Nina Young and father of Keely Mann and Derek Young. Leopold Koenig, uncle of Lisa Koenig. Mark Kaufman, father of Joseph Kaufman. Arlene Robert, aunt of Larry Medvinsky. Erica Hurwitz, mother of Diana Hurwitz and Marietta Hurwitz. Louis Rubens, husband of Zell Rubens and father of Mark Rubens and Scott Rubens. Jake Rimland, son of Lauren and Ed Rimland and brother of Benjamin and Matthew Rimland. Jack Smith, brother of Michelle Smith and uncle of Benjamin Gendel. Ronnie Liebertoff, mother of Dana Roseman. And on the anniversary of their death, we remember Anne Kramer Barbanel, Gertrude J. Bonamy, Jack Botchin, Joseph Broder, Donald Birch, Lester F. Cohen, Dorothy Dubin, Robert I. Edlitz, Fred Eager, Gloria Elkin, Herbert Falk, Gisela Fields, Muriel Feinerman, Gertrude Franklin, Owen Freed, Hyman First, Ida Gitlow, Betty Goldstein, Harry Goldstein, Herman Cantor, Justin Karp, Burton Katz, Lynn Fortgang Katz, Ruth Kay, Seymour Klein, Irving Jack Krantz, Sophie Liebman, Harriet Liddell, Helen Lustig Mart, Philip Meskin, Norman Newman, Villain Reckless, Bessie Rocklin, Alan Rosenberg, Rose Ross, Ruth Siegel, Abe Simon, Robert Allen Waller, Martin J. Wang, George Waxenberg, David Zenkel. If there are any names that have not yet been spoken aloud or any that I've inadvertently mispronounced, I invite you to say them now. Let us join together in these words which give thanks for the gift of life. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah, B'yalma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei, B'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala uv'yizman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lamei olmaya, Yit barach v'yishtabach v'yit pa'ar v'yit romam v'yit naseh, V'yit hadar, v'yit aleh, v'yit halal, shemei d'kudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechemata, da'amiran b'yalma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. May the one who creates harmony on high send peace to us, to all Israel, and to all those who mourn. And let us say, Amen. A few brief announcements before we conclude our service together. There are so many things going on at WRT in the next week and a half that I won't be able to share all of them with you. I'll only be able to share even a small fraction of them. So please check our weekly e-communications, our calendar, and our website for everything that's coming up. But a few small highlights, not small highlights, a few select highlights, is that Torah study tomorrow morning begins at 9 a.m. via Zoom. Please come and join us first for worship and then for study of this week's parashah. Next week, we will be having outdoor community gatherings, socially distanced and safe, in honor of Hanukkah, where we'll light our giant menorah that's out there on Mamaroneck Road. We'd love to see you there. Please know that you need to sign up in advance, as there is a limited number of spaces on account of wanting to make sure that our campus is safe under these pandemic conditions. So please check our e-communications to find out how you can sign up for one of our many nights of lighting our giant menorah on our campus during the entire week of Hanukkah. We'll also, for Hanukkah, be having a toy drive that serves the WJCS Pleasantville Cottages schools. You can drop off toys in the bins on our campus, which will be located behind the main building in the CJL circle all throughout the week of Hanukkah. If you join us for one of those giant menorah lightings, you can drop off a toy then. Alternatively, if coming onto our campus is something that is not safe for you to do, then check our e-communications and you can buy a gift off of the Pleasantville Cottages Amazon wish list and still make sure that the young people who live at the Pleasantville Cottages are able to have a happy holiday season. Also, next Friday night, we're having a very special program for our Connections families. So those are families with children in grades K to 2, where instead of going to Katz's Deli, which would be not a safe thing to do in a pandemic, Katz's Deli will be coming to you. So if you'd like to celebrate Hanukkah with your WRT community, participate in our Shabbat Hanukkah, our consecration program, and enjoy some really delicious Ashkenazi cuisine, then please sign up to have Katz's Deli brought to you. You'll find out how to pick up your meal at WRT by, again, looking at our e-communications. Just two last things. A very special Havdalah celebration with Rabbi Blake will take place on Saturday, December 19th. I guess that's not this Saturday, and it must be 3 Saturdays from now. Not this Saturday, not the next Saturday. The Saturday after that Saturday is a really special Havdalah with Rabbi Blake. We hope that you'll join him for that. Last but not least, actually last and maybe most important of all, we want to wish Mazel Tov to our 3 B'nai Mitzvah families, to the Grassheims, to the Wagners, and to the Goldfarbs. We hope that this weekend is a wonderful Simcha celebration for you and for your loved ones. Let us conclude by giving thanks for things in our life that are sweet. Cantor?
I have to unmute myself before I start talking. We're going to say the blessing over the wine together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho be'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu. Zikaron lema'aseh v'reshit, ki hu yom techilah lemikra kodesh, zecher litziat Mitzrayim, ki vanu v'acharta ve'otanu kidasha mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kodshecha be'ahava uvratzon hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat. Amen. L'chaim.
And as we prepare to give thanks for things in our life that help to sustain us, I might ask my clergy colleagues to help us bring forth, not from the earth, but from the attendee part of the meeting, our fellow congregants who are joining us this Shabbat. Let's give thanks together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom. Look, it's the tiniest little challah, but it can light up even the emptiest stomach.
I like that. But you have to use your imagination for it to work.
I do. Actually, I don't. Just my mouth.